The cost of I hate you, he said, I hate you. 4 years later, he cried when he saw his children. Call to action. CTA. At the start, if you've ever been underestimated or heartbroken, hit that like button right now and subscribe. This story of silent resilience will remind you that your darkest moment is just the beginning of your greatest strength. Let's dive in. The shocking hook. The CEO's cruelest mistake. He slammed the door in her face with the words, "You disgust me." 4 years later, he broke down crying upon seeing the children who looked exactly like him. Aurora Hayes had always believed love wasn't supposed to hurt like that. She had given up everything she once thought she wanted because she believed she had finally found someone worth changing her life for. Jonathan Vance, one of Chicago's most successful CEOs, had swept her into a world she'd only seen in movies. Penthouse apartments overlooking a city that glittered like diamonds. Dinners at restaurants where month-long reservations could suddenly appear with his name on them. Cars so quiet, they made her own heartbeat sound loud. He was magnetic, handsome, with midnight dark hair and eyes the color of a clear winter sky. Every woman wanted him, and for a moment, he chose her. In private, behind closed doors, he held her like she was the only warm thing in his cold world. He whispered that she made him forget the noise in his head, and she believed every word, even as his touch became distant, even as his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. She had been so desperate to keep that version of him alive that she ignored the signs of the coming storm. Part 1. The shut door and the empty city. The day everything shattered started like any other. Aurora made breakfast, kissed Jonathan's cheek before he left for his morning meetings, and spent the afternoon finishing a marketing project she hoped would impress him. When he returned home, she could see he was exhausted. The strain in his jaw, his shoulders rigid beneath his expensive suit. But she wouldn't let fear stop her. She took a breath, walked up to him with her heart in her hands, and told him she was pregnant. She braced herself for surprise, confusion, perhaps even anger. But deep down, she hoped for sweetness, a smile, a hug, something that would tell her she hadn't been a fool for loving him. Instead, Jonathan looked at her with an expression that froze her blood. No shock, no hesitation, just cold calculation, as if analyzing a spreadsheet with a percentage he disliked. For too many seconds, he said nothing. Then, with a breath of disgust, he pulled away from her. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat and cutting, like steel grating against glass. "You disgust me." Aurora didn't believe she had heard him correctly at first. The words were so vile, so cruel, her brain refused to process them. But then he walked toward the door without looking back, and the finality of his steps hit harder than the insult itself. He opened the door, paused as if deciding whether he owed her anything more, and then slammed it shut behind him. Silence swallowed the room. Aurora stood frozen, every cell in her body shaking. She clutched her stomach, as if protecting the tiny life within from the words that had cut so deeply. She could still hear the echo of, "You disgust me," reverberating in her chest like a runaway heartbeat. Tears rushed so fast she choked on them, sinking to the floor as if her legs no longer remembered how to hold her. She didn't know how long she stayed there, huddled, the gleaming skyline outside mocking her with its beauty. The apartment felt daunting and hostile without him in it, as if the walls themselves had turned against her. When the sun rose, painting the city gold, Aurora realized that none of her life belonged to her anymore. Jonathan had replaced the furniture, chosen the decor, dictated every plan and decision. Her family was hundreds of miles away, and she hadn't spoken to her friends in months because her entire world had been consumed by him. There was no room for her left there, no reason to stay. With mechanical movements, she stood and began to pack. She only took what was hers, a few pieces of clothing, some books, her laptop, and the tiny ultrasound photo she had taken earlier that week. The photo that had filled her with joy before he corrupted it with his rejection. She left his key on the countertop. There was nothing more to say. She boarded a cross-country bus that night, her stomach churning with nausea and grief, watching the city that once promised her everything blur into a smear of lights and memories she couldn't bear to hold on to anymore. As the miles sped by, Aurora pressed a protective hand over her abdomen, whispering in a voice shattered by tears. "I'm sorry you heard that. I won't let anyone speak to us like that again. I won't let you feel unwanted, ever." She had no idea where she was going. She had no idea how she would survive. But she knew one thing. Jonathan Vance would never get another chance to break her again. That night, somewhere between nameless towns and the future she couldn't see, she fell asleep curled up against the bus window, exhaustion finally claiming her. And in that vulnerable moment, her last coherent thought was both a promise and a plea. That someday, this pain would mean something. That someday, she would remember his rejection not as the end of her story, but as the beginning of a life worth living for. Interactive question. If you were Aurora, would you have left immediately? Or would you have tried to contact his family or friends? How crucial is it to physically escape a place where you've been deeply hurt? Share your thoughts. Part 2. Twin blessings in a quiet town. The bus pulled into a quiet town just before dawn, the kind of place that doesn't make headlines, where no one looked twice at a stranger stepping off with a single suitcase and tired eyes. Aurora didn't choose the town because it was special. Maplewood, Ohio, chose her because she was too exhausted to stay on the road any longer. And something about the peaceful silence of the early streets made her feel like she could finally breathe again. The buildings were old but well kept, the sidewalks cracked but clean, and the air smelled of pine and distant rain. It was a place untouched by people like Jonathan Vance, and for the first time in days, she didn't feel haunted by his voice. She found a room to rent above a bakery, where the landlord asked no questions. The scent of fresh bread wafted up through the floorboards every morning, a strange comfort that reminded her she was still alive. She found a small clinic nearby and began her prenatal checkups again. The doctor was kind and gentle and never asked why she was alone. She gathered the courage to apply for a part-time job at a small bookstore across the street. The owner, an older woman named Ruth, didn't care about resumes, as long as Aurora showed up on time and loved books. Aurora did both. She shelved, checked out customers, and spent her lunch breaks reading books on pregnancy, trying to prepare for the only future she now had. Her pregnancy was not easy. She was constantly tired. Her body ached in ways she'd never known. The doctor confirmed what she had started to suspect. Twins. Aurora sat in stunned silence as she looked at the monitor, seeing 2 tiny fluttering heartbeats. She smiled, but tears fell at the same time. 2 heartbeats meant double the diapers, double the crying, double the fear. But it also meant double the love. And in her heart, she knew it was not an accident. Life had taken everything from her, but it was giving her these 2 souls. They were the reason she would survive. As the weeks passed, she began to build a life from scratch. She went to work, saved every penny, learned how to stretch meals and budget every cent. She bought secondhand baby clothes, read parenting forums late into the night, and painted the tiny back room in soft colors, one wall at a time. There were days she woke up paralyzed by fear, overwhelmed by how alone she was. Nights when she felt the ache of his rejection, like a bruise that hadn't healed. But every time one of the babies kicked, she remembered why she couldn't crumble. She talked to them constantly, telling them stories, singing softly as she folded their clothes or rubbed her swollen belly. She wasn't sure if they could feel how much she loved them, but she hoped they did. One cold, late autumn night, the labor came too early. She collapsed on the bathroom floor, barely able to reach her phone. Ambulance lights flashed like lightning through the windows. At the hospital, everything blurred into noise and bright white light. Nurses worked quickly, voices calm yet urgent. She was terrified. It was too soon. It wasn't time. But her body had made its decision, and all she could do was hold on. Hours later, when she woke, her arms were empty, and her voice cracked as she asked if the babies were alive. They were. 2 premature babies, tiny but fighting. The doctor told her they were strong, they had a chance, but the road ahead would be hard. Aurora spent the next few weeks in the NICU, barely sleeping, her chair pulled up next to 2 incubators, where her children struggled to breathe. She named them Ava and Finn. They were so small, their hands no bigger than her fingertip. She read to them every day. She held them skin to skin when the nurses allowed. She sang the lullabies her mother once sang to her. Every beep of the machines made her heart stop. Every pause in their breathing stole the air from her lungs. She lived minute by minute, heartbeat by heartbeat. The nurses started calling her the fighter. They said she was the calmest mother on the ward, the one who never broke down, the one who whispered hope to her babies even when the monitors screamed. But they didn't see the nights Aurora spent in the hospital bathroom, curled up on the tile floor, sobbing into her hands. They didn't hear the prayers she whispered to a God she wasn't even sure she still believed in. All she knew was that she had to stay. She had to keep showing up. She had to be strong, even when she wasn't. When Ava finally opened her eyes for the first time, Aurora laughed through her tears. When Finn wrapped his fingers around hers, she knew she would never let go. They were hers, not his, not anyone else's. Hers. The world could take everything, but it could never take this. And even in the darkest hours of that hospital ward, she began to believe, maybe just barely, that this pain was not the end. It was the beginning of something no one could ever take away. Part 3. The CEO's unexpected sponsor, Jonathan Vance, hadn't thought about Aurora Hayes in a long time, or so he told himself. His days were packed with meetings, travel, headlines, and sleek dinners where no one spoke the truth. His empire had grown, his name etched into skyscrapers and luxury brands, and his face appeared on magazine covers next to numbers that only rose with every quarter. But the silence that filled his penthouse at night was the kind that got under your skin. He had women, plenty of them, beautiful, ambitious, carefully selected to match his lifestyle, none of whom lasted more than a few weeks. They came and went as if he were changing the decor. And yet, none of them stuck. None of them made him feel anything anymore. Once in a blue moon, he'd scroll through old photos on his phone, pretending he was just clearing storage, when his thumb would freeze on a picture he forgot hadn't been deleted. Aurora laughing in the sunlight on the balcony. Aurora curled up on the sofa with a book. Aurora holding an ultrasound with a shaky hand. Tears in her eyes. Hope and fear intertwined. He deleted that last one. Finally. But the image stayed in his mind longer than he cared to admit. He remembered the day she left, the way her face had sunken, how quiet she had been. At the time, he had convinced himself it was mercy, that she was too soft for his world, that he would have destroyed her eventually. But now he wondered if the destruction had already happened the moment he turned the knob and didn't look back. What brought her back into his world wasn't guilt, or even memory. It was a coincidence, or perhaps something more cruel. His company was sponsoring a charity event at a hospital upstate, one of the many facilities his name was tied to through funding and investment. He didn't like public visits, but the board insisted on a photo opportunity. So he came. Flashes, forced smiles, cold hallways, and the usual parade of small talk. He shook hands with doctors, glanced at children he barely noticed, until one of the nurses asked if he'd like to visit the neonatal wing. Something about the way she said it made him pause, and not knowing why, he accepted. The room was quiet, a cocoon of soft beeps and sterile air, filled with new mothers and sleeping infants. And then he saw her. At first, he thought he was imagining it. She was standing with her back to him, gently rocking a baby in her arms, dressed in a soft yellow sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. She looked thinner, paler, but unmistakable. His breath hitched. His world shrank to the space between her and the child she held. And then she turned, and her green eyes met his. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. She just stood frozen, like a deer caught in headlights, like a dream that had become real and dangerous. But it wasn't just her. Beside her was another baby in a pink bassinet, identical to the one she held, and both had dark hair and piercing blue eyes that looked too familiar, too specific to ignore. He felt it in his gut, the cold punch of recognition. Twins, girls, about a year old, perhaps less. Eyes like his. It was impossible, and yet it was utterly not. He felt the floor shift beneath him. For the first time in years, he couldn't think, couldn't calculate, couldn't control his face. He just stared, wide-eyed, mouth agape, until the nurse next to him touched his arm and asked if he was all right. Aurora turned away, clutching both children protectively. She didn't say a word. She didn't give him a chance to speak. A moment later, she was gone, out the door with her daughters, leaving him in a fluorescent-lit hallway with nothing but silence and the pulsing echo of his own heartbeat. Jonathan stood there long after she left, unable to move. He barely heard the rest of the tour, couldn't recall what he said to the press. On the flight back to Chicago, he didn't open his laptop. For the first time in a long time, business meant nothing. Numbers offered no distraction. All he could see was Aurora's face, the babies, his daughters. He didn't know how to explain what he felt. It wasn't just shock. It wasn't just guilt. It was something deeper, a kind of loss he didn't yet understand, a realization that while he had been building towers of steel and glass, something real had grown without him, something beautiful. And he had missed all of it. That night he didn't go home. He walked the streets for hours, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, his head down. His reflection in the windows looked like a stranger, and somewhere between Madison Avenue and the park where no one recognized him, Jonathan Vance, the man who thought he could buy or rebuild anything, finally realized he might have destroyed the one thing that truly mattered before it even had a chance to begin. Interactive question. Do you believe Jonathan deserves a chance to be a father to Ava and Finn, even after what he said to Aurora? Is it ever possible to fully earn back trust after such a cruel act? Let us know in the comments. Part 4. The Bridge of Humility. Jonathan didn't sleep the night after seeing Aurora again. No matter how many times he closed his eyes, the image of her standing in that hospital hallway, 2 infants in her arms, infants who looked unmistakably like him, looped in his mind. The shock had left him breathless, but now it was replaced by something far worse: remorse. The silence that had once protected his pride now felt suffocating. He had spent the last 4 years pretending he made the right choice, believing pushing her away was an act of strength, not cowardice. But seeing the outcome of that choice so vividly shattered every illusion. He hadn't just walked out on her. He had walked out on them. The next morning, he didn't go to the office. For the first time in years, he canceled every meeting, turned off his phone, and ignored the incessant buzzing from his assistant. Instead, he sat in the corner of his sleek, cold kitchen, made of glass and marble, but utterly lifeless, and tried to figure out how he could fix what he had broken. He had no contact for her. She had vanished from his world without a trace after that night. A part of him had always assumed it was for the best. He figured she would move on, forget him, maybe even be better off. But she hadn't just moved on. She had built a life without him, a life that included his children. And she had done it alone. He hired a private investigator, someone discreet. He hated the idea of invading her privacy, but he knew no other way. Within a few days, the man returned with a small file. Aurora Hayes, residing in a quiet neighborhood 2 hours north of the city. A modest apartment above a small bookstore, no romantic affiliations. Works part-time at the same shop. Raising 2 children, Ava and Finn. Healthy. Active. Described by neighbors as warm, responsible, and reserved. No mention of their father anywhere. It was as if Jonathan had been erased. But when he saw the photographs, Aurora pushing the twins on a local park swing set, bending down to wipe tears or tie shoes, always alone, he felt a sharp, bitter pain settle in his chest. He didn't know how to approach her. Forcing his way in would feel like a violation, but staying away was no longer an option. So he drove up there one afternoon, his heart pounding, his hand sweating, rehearsing every possible way to say what couldn't be unsaid. He didn't expect to be welcomed. He expected anger, perhaps even hatred. What he didn't expect was to find her working behind the counter, her hair pulled back, a tired smile on her face as she handed a receipt to a customer. She looked up, and the moment she saw him, the smile vanished. Color drained from her face, but she didn't say a word. She walked into the back room and closed the door. Jonathan stood frozen. The air in the bookstore felt heavier now. The customer glanced at him curiously before leaving. He waited, unsure if he should follow her, unsure if he had the right. But after a minute, she returned. Her eyes were glazed over, and her voice, when she spoke, was quiet and level. She told him she didn't want a scene, that the twins were safe, that they didn't know who he was, and that she didn't plan on changing that. He tried to speak, but she cut him off. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. That almost hurt more. She simply told him that she had nothing to say to a man who had once looked her in the eye and called her disgusting, then vanished when she needed him most. He asked if he could meet the children. She shook her head. She said they were not a second chance for him to feel better. They were not a performance. They were people, innocent, small people, who had never heard his name. And he had no right to show up 4 years later and ask for inclusion just because he suddenly realized what he missed. He asked if there was anything he could do. She said no, and then she told him to leave. But Jonathan didn't leave the town. He checked into a nearby hotel. He spent his days sitting in his car at the end of the bookstore's street, watching her walk the twins home, helping them into their coats, laughing at something one of them said. He watched them through the bakery window, sitting on stools, swinging their legs, their faces identical to photos of his own childhood. He saw Finn chase a leaf down the sidewalk and Ava fall asleep against Aurora's shoulder. He wasn't stalking. He was witnessing what he had missed. It felt both cruel and necessary. And one evening, when Aurora spotted his car parked across the street and didn't approach to yell or ask why, He knew it was the beginning of something. Not forgiveness, but a crack in the wall. He left her a letter at the bookstore. Not to beg, just to explain. Not as the man who once broke her heart, but as the man who had finally seen what that decision had cost. He told her about the dreams he'd had since the hospital, about how nothing felt complete anymore. He said he expected nothing, not even a response. He just needed her to know that he saw them, all three of them, and that he wasn't going to disappear again. She didn't respond, not at first. But a week later, he found a note slipped under his car's windshield wiper. 4 words. They start school Monday. It wasn't an invitation. It wasn't a welcome. But it was something. And for Jonathan, it was enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over. That perhaps, if he was patient, if he showed up every day with humility instead of excuses, he might one day earn the right to be a part of the life he had so carelessly walked away from. Part 5. Earning the right to stay. Jonathan didn't know what to expect that Monday morning, but he woke before his alarm. He dressed in a dark sweater instead of a suit, and he drove through the quiet streets, his heart racing in a way it never did for boardrooms or billion-dollar mergers. The small local elementary school was tucked between 2 old brick buildings, its playground empty in the morning fog. He parked across the street, far enough not to be noticed, close enough to see. When Aurora arrived with the twins, holding a tiny hand in each of hers, he nearly stopped breathing. Ava wore a purple coat with stars on the sleeves. Finn's was green with dinosaur patches. They looked too small for the backpacks they wore. Jonathan watched as Aurora bent down to zip Finn's jacket and kissed the top of Ava's head. He didn't try to approach them. He just watched, a lump in his throat, as the door closed behind them, and his chance to start, however small, slipped into a building full of possibilities. The next few days went the same way. Jonathan kept his distance, never crowding, never intruding. He didn't want to force his way into their world like a storm. He wanted to be constant, present, even if unnoticed. After a week, Aurora began to acknowledge him with the smallest nod when she saw him across the street. Then, one afternoon, while waiting outside the school, he saw Finn dart out the doors, trip on his shoelaces, and fall hard. Jonathan didn't think. He moved. He was across the street before he realized he had done it, kneeling beside the boy just as Aurora reached him. Finn wasn't crying yet, more stunned than hurt. Jonathan gently scooped him up and handed him to Aurora, asking if he was all right. His eyes sought her face, and for a moment the years seemed to fall away. She nodded, and though she said nothing, she didn't pull Finn away from him. The next day, when Ava walked past him and paused for a second of curiosity, Jonathan smiled. She didn't smile back, but she didn't look afraid. That evening, Aurora texted him. "If this is serious, they start soccer next week, Saturday morning. Don't be late." He didn't sleep well that night, not from anxiety, but from hope. It had been so long since he allowed himself to feel it. Saturday arrived with early sunshine and dew-covered grass. Jonathan arrived at the field before anyone else, watching the volunteers set up cones and mini-goals. When Aurora arrived with the twins, she walked right up to him without hesitation. She handed him a water bottle and sunscreen for Finn, and said if he was going to be there, he might as well be useful. Jonathan smiled and took his cue, listening intently as she gave instructions. For the whole morning, he tied shoelaces, passed out juice boxes, and cheered from the sidelines. The first time Ava scored a goal, she looked over at him, and he clapped so loud half the field turned around. Her cheeks flushed, but she smiled just a little, and it was enough to make his chest ache. After practice, Aurora didn't rush off as usual. They sat on a picnic bench while the children played. The conversation started cautiously, polite, about the children's teachers, their favorite bedtime books, their personalities, Ava's quiet strength, Finn's boundless energy. Jonathan absorbed every word, and then, after a long pause, Aurora asked the question that had lived between them unspoken for years. Why now? Jonathan didn't deflect. He told her the truth. He told her he thought about her more than he admitted, that he buried it under work and silence and excuses. He told her seeing her in the hospital wasn't a coincidence. It was a revelation, as if a curtain had been pulled back. He told her he knew he didn't deserve her forgiveness, that he had no right to ask to be a part of the twins' lives after disappearing, but that he couldn't stay away now that he knew them. He said he wanted to show up, to try, not to fix the past, but to earn a place in their present. Aurora didn't answer immediately. She looked at the children, watching them chase a butterfly across the grass. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke. She told him she had hated him. Genuinely, deeply hated him, for a long time. But she had let it go when Ava first called her mommy, and when Finn ran to her after his first nightmare. She said forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and it didn't mean trusting again overnight. But she didn't want her children to grow up missing out on something that might turn out to be good, if handled carefully. Jonathan nodded. He told her he would wait, for as long as it took, that he wouldn't pressure them or push his way in, that he would be there every weekend for soccer. Every evening he was allowed to be around. And someday, when the children were ready, he would be the one to answer their questions honestly, no matter how uncomfortable. The weeks rolled by like that, each one warmer than the last. Jonathan became a quiet fixture in their world. He learned what Ava liked on her pancakes and how Finn liked to be spun around before bed. He was allowed to pick them up from school once a week. He started reading bedtime stories on Thursdays, while Aurora caught up on emails. They didn't talk about the past often. But one night, as the twins slept in the next room and they shared coffee over the kitchen counter, Aurora said she never expected to feel safe with him again. But now, sometimes, she did. Not always. Not completely. But sometimes. Jonathan didn't answer with words. He simply looked at her with the kind of quiet remorse that couldn't be faked. And in that moment, she didn't see the man who walked away years ago, but the one who was staying now. Not to be forgiven, but to become someone worthy of forgiveness. The meaningful conclusion, a home built on presence. The winter melted into spring slowly that year, as if the world was waking up from something heavy. Snowbanks shrank to puddles. Trees started budding again. And for the first time in a long time, the air didn't feel like something they had to survive. Aurora stood by the kitchen window one Saturday morning, watching the children draw on the sidewalk with chalk, while Jonathan helped them spell their names in clumsy, colorful letters. She sipped her coffee in silence, trying to grasp the feeling blooming inside her. It wasn't certainty, not exactly, but something close. A quiet peace. She had spent so many years learning to do everything on her own, learning not to need, not to rely, not to expect. But now, she didn't feel alone. Not anymore. Jonathan had become a permanent fixture in their lives, not a guest, not a stranger. He knew the names of their stuffed animals, the sound of Ava's cry when it wasn't real, the way Finn got quiet when he was overwhelmed instead of loud. He knew what brand of toothpaste they liked, and which bedtime story Aurora used when she needed them to fall asleep fast. More than that, he knew Aurora, the real one, the one who wasn't polished or guarded, the one who got frustrated over bills and anxious over doctor's appointments, and got tears in her eyes when Ava called her brave. He had stopped hiding from her and he never used anything she shared against her. That alone was something she never thought she would feel again. Safety. He didn't ask her for anything. No promises. No declarations. He never brought up the past unless she did. And even then, he didn't try to rewrite it. He owned his failures without deflection. That kind of honesty wasn't flashy or romantic. It was hard and quiet, and it made her trust him more than flowers ever could. Aurora had spent so long being afraid that opening the door again would mean being hurt again. But day after day, Jonathan had not just knocked on the door, he had rebuilt it with her. When the twins' 4th birthday approached, they asked if Daddy could come to their party. Aurora didn't correct them. She just smiled and said, of course. After the party, when the sun was setting and the guests had gone home, Jonathan didn't leave. The children were playing on the lawn, too full of sugar and laughter to notice the heaviness in the air. Aurora turned to him, her voice low, and told him she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of what they were becoming. She told him love didn't scare her, losing him did. But what scared her most was rejecting it before it had a chance to exist. Jonathan didn't respond with a speech. He simply took her hand and told her that everything he had ever run away from in his life, vulnerability, truth, connection, had led him right here. And this time, he wasn't running. He told her he didn't need a label, didn't need a timeline. He just needed to be with her, to be a part of their lives in whatever way she allowed, for as long as she let him. That night, after the twins were asleep and the stars came out one by one, they sat on the front steps of her apartment, their legs brushing, the air filled with the quiet hum of spring. Aurora turned her face to him, not with hesitation this time, but with quiet certainty. When he kissed her, it wasn't a first kiss. It wasn't a reunion. It was something in between, something built over years, over pain, over second chances that should have never happened. This life, this messy, ordinary, incredible life, was something she never thought she would have again. Jonathan held her gaze, his voice low but firm, and said, "Me neither." And for the first time in their lives, that wasn't a loss. It was a beginning. Not a perfect one, not a fairy tale, but a real one, earned through pain, rebuilt with patience, and rooted in the kind of love that doesn't demand attention, but is proven in the silence, in showing up, in staying. They didn't need vows or guarantees. They had something better. They had each other. And this time, they weren't letting go. What do you think of Jonathan's transformation? Was his quiet, humble approach the only way to earn back Aurora's trust? Tell us your thoughts below. If this story touched your heart, hit that share button, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales of resilience and second chances. Part 6. The Quiet Routine and the Loud Silence. The quiet routine of Maplewood, Ohio, settled over Jonathan Vance like a warm blanket, a stark contrast to the sterile, high thread count existence he had once cherished. He no longer saw the town as just a convenient stop, 2 hours north of the city. It was the center of his gravity. He hadn't moved back to Chicago. He merely visited his penthouse, now less a home, and more a satellite office for calls that couldn't be ignored. He told his board he was exploring expansion opportunities upstate, a corporate euphemism that masked the reality. He was spending his weekdays reading balance sheets from the bakery's counter, smelling of warm dough, and rushing to the bookstore to buy 4 p.m. for the school run. Aurora watched this shift with a quiet reserve that masked her constant analysis. She no longer saw the distant CEO who once looked at her with contempt. She saw the man who knew which corner of the couch Finn liked to build his pillow forts, the man who patiently retied Ava's stubborn shoelaces, and the man who drank lukewarm tea with her late at night. The past wasn't forgotten, but it had been neatly tucked away, replaced by shared logistics, inside jokes, and a gentle, unspoken companionship. Yet the two worlds remained separate, held apart by a delicate barrier of unspoken history and professional risk. One Tuesday evening, the barrier was forcefully broken. Jonathan was helping Finn with a particularly frustrating puzzle on the worn rug of the living room floor when his phone, which he kept habitually silent, buzzed with an urgent text. It wasn't his assistant. It was Marcus Trent, his closest peer and rival, another titan of the Chicago real estate scene. Marcus Trent. "Jay, where the hell are you? You missed the quarterly charity meeting. And I just saw your face on the Maplewood local blog. You were at the school talent show." "Seriously? Your board is asking questions. We need to talk before this hits the wider press." Jonathan's blood ran cold. He hadn't just been spotted. He'd been documented. He knew the world he left behind operated on a ruthless principle: control the narrative or lose everything. A CEO of his stature, photographed at a local elementary school 2 hours away, wearing a dinosaur t-shirt he'd accidentally stained with pancake batter, was a story waiting to be sensationalized. He excused himself, his jaw tight, and went to the narrow kitchen. Aurora followed him, her expression hardening instantly as she saw the fear in his eyes. She didn't need to read the text. The look on his face, the sudden return of that old professional tension in his shoulders, spoke volumes. "What is it, Jonathan?" she asked. Her voice low. He ran a hand through his dark hair. "It's work. Someone saw me here, at the school. It's messy. I need to get ahead of the story before the board reads it in a column." Aurora crossed her arms, a shadow of the old hurt creeping into her eyes. "The story? What story, Jonathan? The one where a man spends time with his children? Or the one where a powerful CEO has a messy secret life he needs to get ahead of?" "It's not a secret life," he snapped, quieter now, remembering the children in the next room. "It's about the company's image. They see my presence here as a distraction, a liability. They're already nervous about the acquisition deal with Creston Group. They need me focused on their numbers, not on pancake-stained shirts." "Ah," Aurora said, a slow, painful realization washing over her face. "The liability. Is that what we are, Jonathan? A risk to your stock price? I should have known the moment the corporate world calls, the real world gets dismissed." Her quiet disappointment was a more brutal reprimand than any shouted argument. He knew he had handled it poorly, letting the fear of his old life dictate his immediate reaction. "No," he said, stepping closer, desperately trying to bridge the gap that had just opened between them. "No, you are my life, Aurora. But I need my title, my company, my resources to keep this life secure. If I lose control of the narrative, the board could push me out. Then what? I can't support you and the twins with an apartment above a bakery." "We were fine then. We'll be fine now," she insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. He knew she was right about their survival, but he wanted more than survival for them. He wanted the security his name could still provide. "Give me 48 hours, he pleaded. "Let me go back. I will spin the story. I will use my title, my power, to protect this. I'll make it clear that no one touches this life, but I have to do it on their turf." Aurora looked at him, the man who once abandoned her, and the man who now refused to abandon his children. The difference was stark. "Go," she said, her voice flat. "Go, Jonathan. But understand this. If you try to make us a secret again, if you try to minimize our lives to protect your bottom line, don't come back." Interactive question. Do you think Jonathan can truly control the narrative in Chicago without compromising his relationship with Aurora? What's the biggest risk he faces by returning to his corporate environment right now? Share your predictions. Part 7. The Chicago Showdown. Jonathan flew back to Chicago that same night, his heart heavy and his mind racing. The vast, empty penthouse felt more oppressive than ever, a monument to the loneliness he had fled. The next morning, he walked into the Sterling Tower boardroom, the company's epicenter, and found his executive team waiting for him. The air was thick with tension, not of a business crisis, but of a personal one. Marcus Trent, the rival CEO who had messaged him, was there, a snake in a designer suit, feigning concern. Ms. Evelyn Reed, the board chairwoman, a woman who valued stability over everything, sat at the head of the table. Her expression, stone cold. "Jonathan," Ms. Reed began, her voice devoid of warmth, "we need an explanation for the sabbatical. And for this." She slid a printout across the polished mahogany, the blurry photo from the Maplewood blog. It showed Jonathan, smiling awkwardly, holding a slightly sticky paper star, proudly crafted by Finn. Marcus Trent jumped in, his tone falsely solicitous. "We understand you need a break, John, but the optics, man. A man of your standing, at a public school, it implies a lack of focus. It's distracting the market from the Creston acquisition." Jonathan took a deep breath. He didn't deny the photo. He didn't make excuses. He did what he had learned to do in Maplewood, tell the truth, but on his own terms. "This isn't a distraction, Marcus. This is the most focused I have been in 4 years. He looked directly at Ms. Reed, bypassing the others. 4 years ago, I made a profound mistake. I walked away from a relationship, and I walked away from a life I didn't yet understand. The children in that photograph, Ava and Finn, are my daughters and my son. They are the reality I built, not the one I planned." The room was silent. A CEO admitting such a personal, unpolished truth was unprecedented. "My sabbatical was about earning back the right to be in their lives, and that right has been earned through humility, responsibility, and unwavering presence. Qualities, I might add, that are essential for any leader, and which I was lacking until recently." He stood up, towering over the table. "I am not here to ask for your permission to be a father. I am here to tell you that this part of my life, my family, is non-negotiable. Any attempt by this board, or by any competitor," he fixed his gaze on Marcus Trent, "to use my family, my daughters, or their mother, Aurora Hayes, as a liability, will be met with immediate and decisive legal action. I will protect them, personally and financially, with every resource at my disposal." He paused, letting the finality of his threat settle. "Now, about the Creston acquisition. I have a proposal that will raise our Q3 projections by 15%. But if you want to question my commitment based on a picture from a second-grade talent show, then you have fundamentally misunderstood who I am and who I am capable of becoming. Make your choice." Ms. Reed slowly leaned forward, her eyes narrowed, not in anger, but in calculation. She was witnessing a ruthless, strategic man, but one now anchored by a powerful, unshakable motivation. This was a new kind of strength. "The Creston proposal, Jonathan," she said, nodding toward the papers. "Let's see it." He had won the battle for the moment, not by lying, but by integrating his two worlds, forcing the corporate one to acknowledge the personal one. He was still the Titan, but his foundation was no longer cold marble. It was the soft, worn rug of his children's home. Later that afternoon, he called Aurora. "I told them the truth," he said simply. "I told them you and the children are non-negotiable." Aurora listened, the line silent for a long moment. "And the cost, Jonathan?" "The cost," he said, looking out at the sterile, billion-dollar view, "is that I now know this office is only a place I work. Home is Maplewood. I'll be on the train tonight." Part 8. The first holiday and a new beginning. Jonathan kept his promise. He returned to Maplewood and began the slow, challenging work of integrating his power into their modest world without overwhelming it. He quietly set up a trust fund for Ava and Finn's education, naming Aurora as the sole trustee. He bought the small, charming building that housed the bookstore and the apartment, ensuring Ruth's continued ownership of the business and granting Aurora and the children permanent, rent-free security. These were not grand gestures designed for forgiveness. They were quiet, fundamental acts of responsibility designed for stability. The real shift came during the holidays. They didn't fly to a private island or a European villa. They spent Thanksgiving in Maplewood. Aurora's mother, recently released from the hospital after her stroke, was there, frail but recovering, and still guarded around Jonathan. They cooked in Aurora's small kitchen, all four of them. Jonathan surprisingly adept at carving the turkey, Finn responsible for mashing the potatoes, a task he took with great seriousness, and Ava helping Aurora set the mismatched, beloved dinner plates. As they sat around the small wooden table, a table that had seen countless solitary dinners for Aurora, Jonathan looked around at Ava and Finn, whose identical blue eyes sparkled with sugar and joy, at Aurora, whose face was soft with a peace he hadn't seen 4 years ago, and at her mother, who gave him a tiny, grudging nod of approval as he poured her a glass of water. In the midst of the happy chaos, Jonathan felt the familiar burning behind his eyes. He quickly lowered his head, a genuine, powerful wave of emotion washing over him. It wasn't the guilt of what he lost that brought the tears now. It was the profound gratitude for what he had been given back, a second chance that he had spent years trying to earn. Aurora reached for his hand under the table, her touch gentle and certain. She didn't ask what was wrong. She already knew. He looked up, meeting her gaze, his eyes moist, and she smiled a quiet, reassuring smile that spoke volumes. Welcome home. He had once believed that power meant controlling the entire city, but he finally understood that true power lay in protecting the small, fragile circle of light around the woman and children he loved. He had closed a door 4 years ago with cruelty. He had now earned the right to keep this one open forever. Tio, what do you see next for Aurora and Jonathan? Will the corporate world try to pull him back? Share your hopes for this family's future in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe for the final sweet chapters.